So yes, and as mentioned, this meeting is also recorded because then we put it up on our YouTube channel. So welcome everyone. I'm extremely happy to be here introducing another speaker in our series of webinars in the Human Behaviour and Fires group of the International Association for Fire Safety Science. And my name is Enrico Ronchi, and I'm here together with Erika Kuligowski. Hi, Erika, leading this group. And today we have a talk about disability, from disability to heterogeneity. So we will look at people with disabilities, but learn more about how their movement and behavior can have an impact on evacuation, and we will try to understand how pedestrians move in a crowd when we consider also people with disabilities. So, as mentioned, we are a group within a permanent group within the International Association of Fire Safety Science, and myself and Erica has been coordinating this since the last symposium of IAFSS. There was in 2021, postponed because of the pandemic. I just also want to mention our technical support, Arthur Royer, that is, let's say, the brain behind the scenes that is making sure that all these webinars functions. And thanks to him, is a PhD student of mine that helps out with arranging these events. And we are at the 8th event of our webinar series. And this is just one of the activities that we have in our group. So if you're interested in being in the loop of our activities or participating more actively, just please join. It is free to join to the mailing list of our group and being updated. And I can see Arthur now put the link to sign up to our mailing list in the chat. And as I said, then you can express if you just want to be updated on this type of events like webinars and so on, or if you want to have also a more active role, because we have again a set of activities that are ongoing, including working on a roadmap on the research in the field of human behavior in fires. So this is the work that Erica has been leading for some time now, and we will give an update at the next IAFSS conference that we will have in October in Japan. So there will be an update on this. So we hope to see you, many of you, in Japan as well, and hopefully we can meet finally in person with many of you that we met online only. But let's go and talk about today. Today I'm extremely glad to introduce Paul Geoerg. Paul is a doctor and works as a research fellow at the Association of Fire Protection Engineering in Germany, and he's engineering enthusiast for the empirics of pedestrian dynamics. So we go into the world of experiments, which is one of the best part of our research field. And his research focuses on the influence of individual heterogeneities on movement and its consequences on crowd movement characteristics. So looking from the individual to the crowd. And he's passionate about what individual characteristics in a crowd support safe, comfortable movement and how performance is affected. Paul will talk about how the movement of homogeneously and heterogeneously composed crowds differ, so ranging from different types of crowds, and what phenomena can be observed, and what are the consequences for evacuation planning, because we don't forget that many of us work with evacuation design. And he advocates the course to acknowledge people's individuality and use it as an opportunity to create optimized conditions for entire systems. So I'm really glad to have you here, Paul, and I just want to highlight how important I think this topic is. So, but I don't really want to steal more time from you. So the plan is the following. Paul will give a presentation of approximately 40 minutes. In the meanwhile, during the presentation, you're really welcome to add questions in the chat, and we will take them at the end in a Q&A that we will moderate. And as I said, so if during the talk you have questions, please write them in the chat. Otherwise, at the end, when we will have the Q&A, we will also give the opportunity to have, let's say, people presenting their questions orally if we have time, because generally we get a lot of questions during the talks. But again, Paul, I don't steal too much time from you, so very welcome and thank you for giving this talk. So I leave you the floor.
Many thanks. Could you see my screen?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, great. Many thanks, Enrico, for this kind introduction, and many thanks to Erika and Arthur and you, Enrico, for the invitation. And very, very welcome to everyone. It's an honor to be invited here as a speaker. And I think this is a very important webinar because I think we have hard to view opportunities to get out of our own bubble and learn from other perspectives and learn from each other. And that's why I would like to take you today on a journey into the empiric of pedestrian dynamics and focusing on an interesting aspect of heterogeneity. I will present insights into important findings about pedestrian dynamics in heterogeneous clouds. And this is what I hope for, increase a kind of awareness to use for the use of models and the limitation applying the results. I would encourage you to use key performance values as what is made for, as tools for estimation with conditions and with boundaries. So why is it important to talk about the difference between science or models and reality? Models are simplified representations of our real world. In Human Behaviour and Fire, we use many different kinds of models, for instance, fire drills, lab experiments, or computer simulations. They are great opportunities to identify and investigate patterns or laws in complex relationships, because these models are reduced representations of our reality. We can control the boundary conditions and thus can isolate single effects, because the real life is complicated and it's a complex system. Such complex systems are characterized as nonlinear, emergent, interaction-based, self-organized, self-regulatory, or path-dependent. But complex systems are worth a lecture series of their own. For today, I think it's enough that we need to know that we need to reduce complexity in a reasonable way in order to study or to understand complex systems. The key emphasis here is on the word reasonable, because the trick is to limit the simplification to the essential features of the system. This means that the essential elements are included and everything superfluous is not considered. And the most important question here is which objects, properties, or features are important in order to just be able to represent a principle. I will give you now an example. Let's imagine a pedestrian in a shopping mall, like me. He has hair, okay, in my case not, but here I have face, arms, I wear clothes and shoes. A pedestrian is a complex system, may interact nonlinear with my environment, self-organized. Emergencies arise from many pedestrians if they interact. So we want to look at this pedestrian to analyze its movement. And completely uninteresting for this question is, for instance, the kind of my sunglasses or the color of my trousers. I do not necessarily it did not necessarily determine the movement, but may have an influence on my attractiveness to neighbors. But however, we do not want to consider this property for today. In this way, we decompose the complex system and to evaluate properties in terms of their essentiality. Often this is an interdisciplinary iterative process that takes many years. And in our example, we might conclude that the relevant simplification for the movement of the pedestrian is my bicycle dimensions projected on the floor and supplemented with some information about, for instance, the step length, the step width, or my unimpeded movement speed. So, and this is our model of a pedestrian. Okay, I would now like to take a look with you at two typical models that we use to generate characteristic values in the discipline of pedestrian dynamics. You will see they are artificial, very controlled situations, very abstract settings. And I want to start with a so-called single file experiment. Oh, sorry. The lab experiment for this is people walking in an oval in a single file. The participants walk one after the other. Overtaking is not allowed. Performance as participants is significantly influenced by what the person in front of them does. We use such design to determine the relationship between the distance as a representative of the available space and speed in different situations. You can see such a relationship here. And even if there are controversial discussions about the term, it is often called the fundamental diagram. You see that from the left to the right, the distance to the person in front. It's called the headway. And from the bottom to the top, the speed. If you have less space at the front, you will move slowly. If you have more space, you can go as fast as you like, and you are comfortable. And at some point, you go at speed where you feel comfortable. Then the curve saturates. Now let's take a look at an experiment in which people walk into a group, for example, through a bottleneck. Overtaking is now allowed, and the system is a little bit more complex. Now it's no longer a matter of distance alone. The speed, again from the bottom to the top, is determined by the space you have available. Or if you think of it as an inverse, by the density. If you are all alone, the density is low. You can walk as fast as you like. If more people come along, you have to share your available space. You judge, you interact, you adapt the speed to avoid collisions. And the closer you get to the bottleneck, the more crowded it gets. And the more crowded it gets, you must go slower until eventually you are stuck in a jam. So such fundamental diagrams are available for many types of geometry, for different forms of motion, unidirection, free or multi-direction, or population. They are the basis for the tools used to evaluate complex geometry. Okay, we have now covered how we generate data in lab studies. Now I may now zoom out again and motivate why it's essential to use as many precise or realistic models as possible to design blending or decision issues. Because even in 2023, unnecessary crowd accidents occur regularly. Here I present you a report based on the fantastic data collection of Claudio Feliciani and colleagues. This paper is a must-read, and I highly recommend you to read the paper. The publication also includes a comprehensive collection of data on these events and shows where and in which context such crowd accidents happen. The summary, even with this great data collection, would allow much more in-depth analysis, quite simple. Everywhere in the world, we have such events. Feliciani et al. Have convincingly shown that the ground accidents occur wherever there are high population densities, for instance, in regions of the world where many people live. This is, of course, plausible, but against the background of the global megatrends, such as aging societies and urbanization, this highlights actual and leads to new challenges for disciplines such as architecture, transportation, urban planning, or event safety. I think we have a consensus here that we want to avoid events like this, and I would like to reflect together with you on what pedestrian dynamic research can contribute on this. Let's come back to the idea of the model idea of the complex system of a pedestrian. In complex reduction, we have two levels to consider. The first level is the mathematical realization of what was found out in the empirical experiment and how those findings were applied to application. We could also call it scaling. The second level is a little bit below that. It is in the context of general concepts of laboratory. Such experiments are models, or in other words, exemplary ideas in which concrete day-to-day situations are used in complexity, in the expectation that all those relevant and performance influencing variables are still included in the model. In general, this is not the case. Experiments have to be reproducible, and they must hardly contain unobserved heterogeneity, in other words, variables that you do not control in your design, but which you do unintentionally measure. For instance, if your movement is calculated by more features than you have selected. And this raises the question, for example, of whether we are making a good choice of complexity simplification with our concept of study when we consider, for instance, a particular cohort of people in our experiment. For example, are we looking at a good example of a typical age profile in our society, especially in case of aging societies? Here I present you, for example, the proportion of older people, bottom to the top, in societies over the last 60 years for some countries. And according to the projections built on the dotted line, that proportion will continue to rise over the next few years. But do you know what age ratios are typically realized in the studies of pedestrian dynamics? They are significantly below the value 0.1. participants are also, for very pragmatic reasons, aged between 20 and 30. They do not use any aid for work. They have no physical, mental, or age-related impairment. Is it necessary from a research pragmatic point of view? Yes, absolutely it is, because you need to reduce complexity for controllability of a bounded condition for reproducibility. But is it realistic? No, it's not, because as age increases here from the left to the right, the proportion of those people in a total population who have some kind of disability increases too. And as I have worked out, this is not only an already important part of the population, it is also the fastest growing group. And that's why we have to consider such populations in our study. I would now like to look with you at what characterizes a heterogeneous crowd. No, I should better say can characterize, because even what I now define as a heterogeneous characteristic is only a model. It's my understanding of a meaningful simplification or decomposing of a complex setting. You see on the left-hand side the footage of a bottleneck experiment. I will use this experiment to explain the main characteristics of a heterogeneous crowd in the next slide. And on the right-hand side, you see the results of an application of this situation in a simulation. It does not depend at all on the model used and on the adjustment of the parameters. I understand that with reasonable re-engineering, you can also trim the results to get close to the result of the experiment. But I would like to show you a principle. We see a completely different picture. The result of the simulation on the right-hand side produces a conic polygon working crowd. The area in the front of the bottleneck is crowded and equally used space, and we observe the high density at the bottleneck and front. And later, agents will gather in a semicircle around the bottleneck and front. In contrast, we observe in the empirical experiment on the left that the available space in front of the bottleneck is not used at all. For instance, here. Neither high density is formed nor the classical semicircle around the entrance is created. Upstreams, there are gaps, for instance, here or here, and unused areas. The participants do not move up and close these gaps. This can be observed especially in the neighborhood of wheelchair users. But what happens there? There you can see no conically crowd, the entrance. Participants in the heterogeneous crowd interact and communicate. They organize the entrance into the bottleneck far ahead of the bottleneck. They leave space, they adapt their speed, and they do not overtake. And if we now operationalize these types of behavior and look at the frequency distributions, you see, without going much in detail, a very general trend. On the left, we have a matrix with behavioral categories on the y-axis, and the approximate locations, measurement area 1, 2, 3, 4, where they occur. The location is not so important for today. They just give you an indication of where the modes of the communication or the interaction take place. Please focus only on the colors. Red means frequently, yellow means less frequently. We see that the most common behavior was for people to turn around or wait in a homogeneous crowd. It was also interesting to see that sometimes participants would like to jostle. Interesting, there were some changes in conditions when wheelchair users were present on the right-hand side. There was noticeably more waiting, but also more communication through gesture and less jostling. You see the more red than yellow. We interpreted that the participants were more respectful and cautious in such conditions. And the key point here is that the heterogeneity in crowd composition can be associated with differences in how people act. And this, I think, could have an impact on macroscopic trends, such as speed-factor relationships. And it's unclear which specific visible attributes and actions of a person matter and why. We have seen that the crowd moves quantitatively differently, but also that the agent in the simulation had passed the bottleneck recognizably earlier. This can also be shown more clearly in this plot. With each passage of the bottleneck, I count people in the y direction, and in x direction the time is presented. You can see how much faster the situation evaporates in the simulation. In the experiment, there are times when no participant passes the bottleneck for a very long time. I have highlighted these times by the orange scatter, and the times correspond to the time where wheelchair users pass the bottleneck. The gaps occur because the space was left after the wheelchair user, and the followers do not gap up but keep the distance. and this leads to longer evacuation time or longer leave time. Do you remember the fundamental diagram I have introduced? I did it at the beginning. If you have less space, you will reduce your speed. For example, on the way to the restaurant break in the soccer stadium. I will show you such a fundamental diagram for the experiment before, because these actions have severe effect on the fundamental diagram. This plot shows average values, the density dependent speed for the experiment. The colors of the scatter represent different width for the color, and the meaning of the markers are not important for us today. We see a decreasing average velocity with increasing density, but obviously density has a much smaller effect on the velocity, because and this leads to a better slope in the curve than expected. In the right plot, we see the fundamental diagram generated by the simulation. It follows the classical expectation because we have not considered the social interaction in the model. The model in simulation follows the classical pattern because it is based on a classical fundamental diagram. Because the agents don't know anything about the politeness or the feeling of togetherness inside the group, and they don't reduce individual speed in case of approaching the bottleneck as a neighbor or feature user. So the question is, how does the perception of the vulnerability arise? Why participants don't overtake a feature, and why do you, for instance, give priority to a feature in front of the bottleneck? That's why this is Max Kinner-Peter from the NRC in Canada, and I asked volunteers in an online study which attributes they would use to interpret vulnerability. We showed them many avatars and asked them to always click on the alternative that they consider to be more vulnerable. Not very surprisingly, we found out that the perception of vulnerability scales with the space by the item. The larger the item, the greater the vulnerability. For instance, a small backpack is perceived less vulnerable than a stroller. And there seems to be a jump in perception here with 2 suitcases. So we wanted to see how big the effect was in a very controlled setting. We wanted to find out how movement in a single file changes when either visuals are present or not. That's why we, again, Max Kinner-Peter and colleagues from the Jülich Research Center, conducted another study in Ottawa, Canada. As you can see, we conducted our study in a gym at the local university. We collected data on frequent consecutive days and had prepared several different scenarios. The images show the still from a video we used to create trajectories. I will come on this later. Participants are filmed from above, walking in a line. To extract these trajectories, we use the Enrico marker, which gives us both the location and the direction of the movement. We are primarily interested in the headway, which is the distance that the participants had from each other, from the head to the head. Along the bottom of the slide, you can see the sketch of the study design. The direction of movement is counterclockwise from the left to the right. I have highlighted 5 people in color. First in green, the leading participant came from the study team and shoots his pacing frequency according to a predetermined beat. We call him a pacemaker, and the pacemaker was wearing headphones and was listening to a metronome that would provide them with desired pace. The clock frequency had been determined in advance so that we could approximate the target speed to map a wider range to have a speed relation. The table on the right shows the different frequencies associated target movement speed as well as the realized movement speed. And as you can see, this worked out very satisfactorily for target corridors greater than 0.5 meters per second, but below that we could not reliably set the speed using the metronome. Second, in teal, you see the predecessor of a feature user, the feature user. We use 2 types of features with slightly different dimensions. Due to the COVID pandemic issues, we are not able to recruit feature users who use their features in daily life. That's why the feature users, the features are used by people without impairment from our study team. They had experience in using the features, they were trained, and participants were unaware that the team members had no actual disability. Fourth, highlighted in orange, you see the participants who walked off the wheelchair, and last in blue, all the other participants. We measured the headway of each participant when walking through an approximate measurement line of 10 centimeters. Well, let's take a look at how we extracted the data. Once again, I will present you a video. First, you can see our pacemaker setting the pace for the single file experiment. Next, you can see individuals are moving in a line. You can see the wheelchair user, his and or her predecessor, and last, his or her followers. These are the followers, yes. Now let's stop. So we use a software called PTRAC from the Ulrich Research Center to detect certain pixel patterns in the footage. Even the Enrico code on the head, this one, we are able to calculate the center of a participant's head for each frame. And here's the center, and I would now like to show you the center point for 15 seconds in the past and in the future, or a little bit more illustrative combined by a line. And given the center of the head, the body height of each individual, knowing the position, the height, and some technical specification of the camera, we can now calculate the projected center of a participant mass on the ground. And now we can concatenate this line to trajectories and finalize, we can plot them and to analyze them. So first, I would like to present you the results of the unimpeded movement speed. The unimpeded speed was measured for each participant at the beginning of each test day. It's a good reference point for the daily performance. And first, it is striking out that we have collected more data points for participants without wheelchairs. This is possible because fewer people participated in wheelchairs than with wheelchairs. We also see a high variance in the values for both groups. The range is from about 0.8 to slightly more than 1.6 meters per second. And overall, that is in the expected range of the literature. This is good result. This is good news. The two wheelchair users were moving a little bit faster on average, but all in all, the same region as the other participants. And the main take-home message here is that the median speed in that movement is around 0.25 meters per second for the overall population, 0.26 for wheelchair users, and 1.21 for participants without wheelchair. So the movement is in the flat movement, speed in the flat movement is the same. So the second result is the fundamental diagram. We plot here the speed over the headway for each participant on each trial. And there are some overall trends that stand out. Here we have all data across all conditions. We call it the burger because we see very nicely the different speed layers. And these distinct and narrow speed layers indicate that the pacemaker was successful in manipulating the speed of participants. However, we see a strong variation of the headway. And this seems to be relatively independent from the speed. And this finding differentiates our study from previous work with homogeneous group. For example, I have reported data from Village et al. With the black crosses, and which shows distinct phases in the speed-head relationship. The strong correlation at low speed and headways, and the flatter curve once speed reaches 0.8 meters per second. And this is interesting, but I think the difference is likely to the pacemaker rotation speed. What is also interesting is that the marginality comes on the y-axis. It appears that speed does not always follow a normal distribution. And this is an important detail because we often use statistical measures as input variables for application. And these measures are not immediately available from multimodal distribution. To make these measures available, distribution must be further processed, for instance, binary. So this might be an important feature for characterizing heterogeneous groups. And now I would like to focus on the situation in a group. I show you a footage of experiments of crowd movements through a bottleneck. This is the same study in Canada with Max Kinatida and colleagues from the Research Center. Each group consists of 25 people, 2 of whom are either a wheelchair user walking with 2 suitcases or nothing at all. The task is to go to the bottleneck after the start. We look again at how the group organizes the movement to the bottleneck. So, after the start, all participants move towards the bottleneck. The videos are time synchronized, and you will notice right away qualitatively that the time to the last passage will differ for the 3 conditions: homogeneous crowd, pedestrians with luggage in the crowd or wheelchair users in the crowd. I will stop the video now when the last participant in the homogeneous crowd passes the bottleneck, and you can see quantitatively the different numbers of participants inside the experimental area. And in the next slide, I would also like to dive a little bit deeper into this qualitative finding. But first, I want to explain the setting. You see here a trajectory plot. That is the combination of each position at each time step for each participant. For the following analysis, I would like to distinguish the participants in terms of their starting position and for two particular positions in certain characteristics. Let's do this step by step. First, the participants starting in the first row. Then, participants on defined starting positions. They either use a wheelchair, carry luggage, or are from the control group without luggage or without a wheelchair. Then, participants starting in the second row who don't start at a specific position. Those participants don't have luggage with them or wheelchair, and they aren't wheelchair users. And last, the last row. We measure the passage through the bottleneck at the blue line. This is here, in the end of the bottleneck. And the first analysis focuses the time it takes to reach the bottleneck. That is the time elapsed between the start of the experiment and the time of reaching the bottleneck for each participant. The second analysis concerns the time it takes each participant to pass through the bottleneck, more precisely the time that elapsed between the passage of an individual and its follower. Let us start with the comparison for the time to reach the bottleneck. It is once again sketched on the right-hand side of the plot in the top line. The data is grouped by the different starting positions, as I mentioned before. The first row, the specific positions of wheelchair or luggage users, the other participants in the second row, and at the last row. This is, as a reminder, displayed at the right of the plot. The colors of the scatter, gray, blue, and deep orange, are according to the study condition, considering wheelchair users, luggage users, or the control group at a specific starting position. So let's have a look at the comparison in the plot. The first row is the fastest, the last row is the slowest, because the time to reach the bottleneck depends on the distance of the starting position. That's trivial. Times to reach are very similar between the groups for the first row. That's plausible because it is in the first row is set by comparable population. The first row is always populated by the participants without luggage or wheelchairs. But we can observe differences between the conditions at the specific start positions and the last rows. The participants in the control experiment feeding the bottleneck in a shorter time than if luggage or wheelchair users were present. It seems that this affects the participants in the last rows. It seems that both the luggage and the wheelchair users are not overtaken by the participants on the last row. Okay, focusing on the time to pass the bottleneck. The time that passes between the passage of two participants. Here we mean time that elapsed after a passage until another passage. The group-specific distinction here is again as for control, wheelchair, or luggage user on the start position, and otherwise the rows the start position. Again, this is displayed on the right-hand side, the bottom line, and the colors of the scatter are according to the study condition with wheelchair users, luggage users, and control participants. Focusing the time, the passage time, we observe minor differences in the first, second, and the last row. Similar people, similar values. Okay? But we draw totally different pictures for the participants in a specific position. The starting positions where the control, wheelchair, or luggage participants were located. If a participant is dealing with two suitcases, the time to pass the bottleneck for the follower doubles. If a wheelchair user passes the bottleneck, the time until the passage of the follower increases in the median by 3 times. And this is very interesting preliminary result. It seems that the time here scale with the dynamic space requirement and the perception of the follower. Okay. I will now draw a short conclusion. I have given you a quick empirical overview of the influence of heterogeneous characteristics in pedestrian dynamics. If people with different externally perceivable characteristics are considered in a crowd, the overall system gets more interactive. It becomes more complex. and the singular dependence of the variable decreases. Of course, a principal relation of speed and distance in the single file fundamental diagram remain, but the variance increases and is, especially for wheelchair users, independent of the density. Also, the distribution of the speed tends in certain speed ranges to nonlinear characteristics. When moving through a bottleneck, we observe an impact of people with luggage and wheelchair users on the overall crowd performance. This observation is verified by two independently conducted studies, at least for the wheelchair users. And when people walk behind a person with luggage or in a wheelchair, it takes more time to reach the bottleneck and increases the passage time to the bottleneck for the followers. Here, the participants and the neighbors, followers, with wheelchair or luggage are more influenced and require more time. The fastest way to pass a bottleneck is without a wheelchair and without luggage. And with luggage, you can pass the bottleneck faster than sitting in a wheelchair. The question that sums it all up: do we need new methods to model and describe the movement of heterogeneous groups of people? I don't necessarily think so. It's not crucial to develop new methods. There are so many great experiments and important findings, but it is important to be careful about scaling these results too easily to other populations. For example, if you look at the fundamental diagram, and I don't dare to show our fundamental diagram, we see a large area of density-independent velocities in the presence of wheelchair drivers. The boundary conditions then changes. The model of the fundamental diagram just assumes that the velocity or flow depends only on the density. And in the population considered by me or us, this boundary condition is no longer valid. This may complicate the transfer, but it does not make the studies of homogeneous groups less useful or less valuable. Quite the contrary, with homogeneous conditions, you can create, for example, more reproducibility and more control that cannot be achieved with heterogeneous groups. But at the end, I would like to point out a methodological issue. When considering the head weight, for instance, as well as when we triangulating the Voronoi cells, we always assume that the space shared between two individuals is always divided and used in equal proportion. We triangulate, for instance, from the center of the head to another head. But in reality, however, a wheelchair user makes a much larger claim on this shared space. So in result, we underestimate the density of the wheelchair user with the current approach, and this makes the comparison, for instance, for the fundamental diagram very difficult and challenging. Before I come to the end, I would like to give you an outlook. I think it's a little bit more extended outlook. Do you remember that my hypothesis at the beginning was that everything is a model? Now that I've showed you results from controlled studies, I want to also illustrate the point of heterogeneity in a less controlled setting. Fire drills are commonly modeled to simulate emergency evacuations, and a good question is how crowd heterogeneity influences evacuation performance and how drills differ from lab studies. I would like to give you now a very brief insight into the general results of two unannounced evacuation drills. First drill was realized in a residential home for disabled people, and the second drill was performed in I think it's a German thing, in a workplace where people with disability work. I don't know if there's something like this outside of Germany. This is a state-supported workplace where mostly people with disabilities work. And even though we filmed the drills with camera, I'm not allowed to show you the pictures. That was the condition for the ethics committee for acceptance, filming without prior consent. The boundary conditions of the drills are chosen very differently. They differ in the number of participants, the number of floors, seasons, time of day, and so on. But I would just like to draw your attention to how much the result of the evacuation time differs. 120 seconds up to 80 minutes. It took more than 80 minutes to move the residents out of the residential home in an exercise in which 5 times more staff were on site than in a normal night shift. And the question is, what's the reason for that? Is it the slower speed in high age or even the interaction that I talked about in my talk? Here I show you the average speed for each occupant And as you can see, the speeds are very slow. More than 50% of the residents in the residential home needed assistance, personal assistance. This means that they could not walk or were not oriented without personal assistance. Personal assistance also means interaction, and we have learned today that interaction also costs time, and in consequence, it reduces the speed. And in result, the measured speeds are slow, much slower than, for example, the measured unimpeded movement speed in our experiment. So, but this does not result in 80 minutes for the short way to the exit. But I would like to conclude by giving you something else to think about. This is the so-called free travel time. This is the time that elapses between the alarm and the start of the movement. And this interval can be very long, depending on many factors. 30 minutes are not uncommon here. The variance is enormous. Think perhaps of people who are hearing impaired, or people who are drunk or sleeping, or if you are occupied in unfamiliar surroundings. You must be able to perceive a signal or a warning as such. You must be able to classify it and interpret it. You must be able to understand it and draw the right conclusion. And you must be able to implement that. You hear a lot of conjunctives in this this. A lot has come together to make this time not unnecessarily long. And I say this as someone who is primarily concerned with the dynamic of movement, as someone who is interested in the dynamic of walking in a group, as the movement process. I want to synthesize you to the fact that there were always other important perspectives to the left and the right of your own discipline. Perspectives that you don't always have to take in detail, but you should know it in an overview. Okay, this is my my final summary of the last 40 minutes. We did a journey into the empirics of pedestrian dynamics, and I have highlighted some challenges in dealing with heterogeneous individual characteristics. I did this in context of diversity or inclusion ideas, but the concept is easily transferable to many other types of heterogeneity, for instance, in carrying luggage, as I did, or family with strollers, or indeed assistive devices to support walking. I kept emphasizing through the presentation that the term simplification is always in context of the term reasonable, and it's generally challenging to represent a very specific situation of movement with a model. The big challenge is the scaling of the effect, because this means to orchestrate an interaction of a single phenomena and to predict their interaction to multiple phenomena. And these effects are generally not linear, as so often in case of nature. When we study ground movement on a lab scale, we already perform considerable simplification. To transfer this into application, we need to increase this simplification many times over, and we need to recognize the importance of emergence as we move out of the lab back into the real world. I would like to encourage you to think of models as a tool in a toolbox. They are useful and they are available. They can be compelling and produce great results, but the main work of the model is always in the preparation, the careful selection, and the critical evaluation of all relevant input variables. Results are only as meaningful as input or the configuration is. So the main take-home message is always ask what's inside the black box. And research is always teamwork. That's why I would like to thank all my colleagues from the NRC and the Research Center, for instance, Euler, who has combined the trajectories and the many participants performing in the study. And that's the reason why I'm working as a researcher. You are always in contact with other experts and great people. You're always forced to develop your point of view. You learn from others and to be inspired by others. There are many barriers here involved: language, daily performance, perspective. But at the end of the day, every sharing and every discussion brings progress. And that's why I would like to thank you for letting me present my perspective and my little findings here today. And I'm looking forward to a controversial, fruitful discussion. Many thanks.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks a lot for your talk. There were a lot of many interesting points of discussion, and I can already see in the chat that we have some questions. So I start in chronological order when those arrive. And again, if anyone else has further questions, please write them in the chat, or you're welcome also to raise your hand, and we can try and give you the word. So I just stopped the sharing from you, Paul, so that we can see you in full screen. So the first question that we got was about the type of population that you looked at. There was a comment that if you had the chance during your experiments also to consider those with cognitive disabilities, along with those with physical disabilities, because we know that this is an area which is very let's say not so much investigated. Do you have any comments on this, or maybe you're aware of someone that looked into this?
Yeah, that's a good question, because but it's I think it's hard to answer, because this kind of disability is really difficult to operationalize. It's really hard to find. You can't build categories to which you can compare. We tried this, and I can put some slides. I can give. Who was asked this question?
Was Ian Sanderson?
Yeah, I can send him a plot where I try to figure out the influence of 7 participants with this mental disabilities on the fundamental diagram. But I think this is not so meaningful, because we had no good operationalization of the mental disability. But it's a good point. We should put more energy on this and try to find out the main effect, because it's not only the movement, it's the orientation, it's the to perceive a signal or to make the decision making before the movement, post the movement, which yeah.
And I guess, Paul, we should always keep in mind, I guess we're looking here still at people that are performing self-evacuation. So if we enter the territory of people that need assistance, there may be a completely different territory. But I'm completely with you with the fact that it's very hard to categorize, because this could be really anything when it comes to cognitive disabilities. I mean, we have research that comes more from WHO with the ICF, the International Classification for Functioning, and there is some guidance that we can use. But again, we are not doctors. We are doctors, but not those doctors. So we should probably, when we do this research, and that's a very good food for thought that you said, in order to operationalize those disabilities, we will probably have to get expertise somewhere else, which is not traditional engineering and so on, more on the medical side. Yeah. But let's go to the forward question, Paul, because there is a few more. Thanks for your wonderful presentation. How would you handle pedestrians holding an umbrella or carrying a child in a crowd of people having some sort of additional object that they carry? In a few countries, one can also see pedestrians carrying head baggage. I believe that also adds the heterogeneity in a crowd.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a kind of heterogeneity, and I think it's in case of the umbrella, it's something like the baggage, or you can compare it to a small backpack, for instance, because you can move this in front of you or on the side of you, and you can use the dynamic space as without an umbrella. But if you have a child on your arm, it's a little bit more difficult. Now you are connected to it. You need more space. And I think you will protect this space in higher densities. So that's why I think it's important to do further studies on this. But I think you can compare it with a wheelchair for the in case of the space requirement, which is not compressible.
Yeah. I mean, there is some research, for instance, that looks into like impact of clothing and things like this, which is very interesting. I mean, yeah, or even, I mean, there is also an impact if you're carrying weight that can have also an impact on your ability to walk and also getting tired. If you remember, Paul, we had a discussion about this at some point, because I did experiments of people carrying heavy backpacks, and then that gets quite tricky after some time. But yeah, it's definitely important. So very good comment on this. And Erica has a more general comment question for you, Paul. where do you see are the research needs in this field? So, if you will have to guide someone else in saying, say, okay, if you get the money and the opportunity and the time, what kind of research would you recommend to do in this domain?
Well, this is a good question. This is a very general question. I think it's most important to find and to do research on settings where the controllability of such experiments is interrupted. And so, and I think it would be very useful to have, for instance, fundamental diagrams which such fluctuating factors inside to create a range which leads for instance, the engineer to use it in the models and applications, because actually we are trying to plan experiments with a high reproducibility, with a very low error band or a very low variance. But I think that's not the point. The point is how we can reproduce our fundamental diagrams with heterogeneous or more heterogeneous cloud composition. And I think this is a good point to start with. Not the high densities or not the speed ranges, more the ranges inside the daily use of the fundamental diagram and the principal relation. I think the relations would be are valid for heterogeneous clouds, but in our experiment we can't reproduce it, but and I don't know why.
Mm-hmm. Paul, and I have a follow-up question on this. I mean, I know you are very much engaged with experimental work, but I'm pretty sure that you know the landscape of models that are out there and overall how they work. So if you will have to point at the biggest limitation that the models have nowadays in the representation of heterogeneous crowds, and also what would you hope is the way forward for representing an heterogeneous crowd, what would you recommend? Because I guess that's a big topic, right? I mean, if this has an impact on our vacation time, and we know that our vacation time is the last person out, not the first person out, I mean, that's the problem with our models and our engineering tools. So what do you think is the way forward in modeling?
Okay, I'm not a modeler, but in my opinion, I think it would be the first important step would be to say it loud and clear that heterogeneous crowds are not considered in the models. That their disability, the person's disability, are not reproduced by the models. I think it's the first step, and then you can try to implement multi-model distributions, for instance, or you can go to the end of the distribution and simulate more scenarios with outliers. For instance, for speed, for space requirement. I think this would be a good engineering approach to figure out such inhomogeneities.
Yeah. I mean that's obvious. There is this mismatch, especially when we talk about things like fire engineering design and so on. We really care about the last one out. I mean, and if thinking about that, we use tools that are designed with average populations, what they call average populations. It's kind of make us thinking that probably we are putting our efforts on the wrong thing. So that's why I think, Paul, the research that you are doing is, I mean, should be put higher up in the priority on roadmaps of future research to do, because that's really what we care about the most when we analyze safety down the line. And I don't know if there is anyone else that has questions, but otherwise I will have a follow-up question on this. Let's see if I just check the chat in case.
But I think that there's much to do in implementing social interactions and the effect of being part of the crowd, or feeling being part of the crowd. I know there are a lot of research outside there, but I'm not so familiar with this.
Yeah, because one follow-up question that I have is that, you know, we focus a lot, and you have very good, you gave a very good overview into aspects related to movement, but of course movement is not the only aspect that is important in crowd evacuation. For instance, things like route choice, or things like more tactical level of decisions to evacuate and so on, are very important. Are you, I mean, I'm familiar with you having reviewed pretty much everything that is out there in this domain, but I mean, if you will have to advise someone to where find information, is there any good source of information on this? Or how will you, for instance, calibrate a route choice in a scenario in which you have heterogeneous crowds and so on?
So you're asking me for a good review paper, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think because I'm familiar with some work that you did in reviewing literature, right? And I don't know if you're familiar with more newer material on this, but maybe you can point at some references for people that are here.
Yeah, I was starting with the SFPE Handbook of Fire-Protection Engineering. There was a great chapter from Kevin Boyce and Steve Wynn. And as I'm right, this work has been updated actually, and will be published soon. And I think this is the main reference for starting, because yeah, this is the large
It's the largest compilation of data that we have nowadays. Enrico, do you have a comment on this? Because you must know when the next version of the SFP handbook should be out.
Yeah, so the chapters are at Springer at the moment. So we're hoping, I don't know if it will be this year, but hopefully early next year will be when the next edition comes out. And you're absolutely right. They have updated that chapter. Ruggiero Lareglio is also an author on that new chapter. So we're really excited to get that out there for engineers to use. It's a lot, they've put a lot of work into it. So thanks for mentioning that, Paul.
Yeah, I think that is really a go-to reference for us that we work with Human Behaviour in fires, but in general, fire protection engineering, because it includes all different aspects of this, from the behavioral side to the modeling side, the empirical side. So that's an important thing to highlight. I mean, I think one of the goals of this webinars is also to be able to share resources and point at the right places where to look for information. So that's definitely recommended. I don't see any further question, and since we are approaching the time, let's see. Yes, one more, let's say, practical information. Arthur has also shared our YouTube channel, where we upload then the recordings of this webinar. So you're, of course, welcome to subscribe to the channel and follow us on YouTube. As I said, as soon as we package them, there we upload them there. And you will also find a compilation of the previous webinars that we've done. But for concluding remarks, I just want to thank one more time Paul for his talk, and for taking the time to share with us his research in the domain of heterogeneous crowds. As I said, I have the feeling that it would have been really not okay to not have a talk on this topic in this webinar series, given the importance of the domain, and in particular, knowing, Paul, that you have done so much effort in this area, trying to collect empirical data, which is, let's say, the primary source of knowledge in our field. Is one of the primary sources of knowledge is to get access to data. So I thank you again, Paul, for your time, and I thank everyone that attended the webinar. And please stay tuned for our next webinars in the series. And yeah, keep in touch, and hope to see you also in person soon.
Many thanks for having me, and see you next week at the PAB.
Yes, thanks everyone.